Discover the advantage of unlimited access to all the stories and resources from IBJ and inside Indiana business. From insights to inspiration, business leaders rely on the IBJ for all things Indiana business. Start your $1 a week trial now at ibj.com/trial offer.
You just never know. Like, opportunities come at times that you're not expecting, and if you just close them off because you're like, well, I'm not open to anything different, you might miss something. In my case, I would have missed coming to work for a really amazing leader.
That was Jackie Gessner, Vice President of Talent Management and HR Compliance at JD Finish Line, talking about her employment law journey to now having an influential role leading teams of people in her sports business organization. And this is IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Well, Jackie, welcome to the Freedom Forum. It's been quite a while since you and I have seen each other, and I'm so glad to have the opportunity to have you on the podcast and to get to know you and your career journey better. However, before we get started, will you please tell our listeners a bit about you, your educational and professional background, and any other factors that have led to you becoming the Vice President of Talent Management and HR Compliance at JD Finish Line?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Angela. I'm so happy to see you. First of all, it has been far too long. And when you invited me to join, I was a little like, oh man, imposter syndrome moment. She has guests on that are my mentors. So I don't know what I'm doing here, but hopefully we have some fruitful conversation. To answer your question, so I'm originally grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I know you're a smaller town country girl, but I'm a suburb, girl raised in Fort Wayne, and largely from kind of coming up in the strong Catholic family, went to Catholic schools. And as I was sort of figuring out my next steps, I wanted to get away from that. I wanted to do something different and be in a place where I didn't know anyone. So I did not want to go to IU or Purdue and wanted to try something different. So my undergrad experience was a little interesting. I started out at Marquette University in Milwaukee and had a lot of aunts and uncles attend that university and had great experience, people I looked up to. So I tried it, and it was a wonderful experience while I was there, but I actually was a transfer student. So I thought I wanted to be a journalist. It's funny that we're doing a podcast right now, and I've never done this before, but early on, that's what I thought I wanted to do, was travel the world, be that person figuring out what was really going on in the news. And that just wasn't right for me. It wasn't at the time what I think as I sat down and joined the student newspaper was not something that was going to be my best skill set match. I transferred to Purdue and ironically came back to a state school. And underlying all of that was always, is law school going to be the path for me? But I didn't know why, and I wanted to find out why, and not just sort of follow an idea without real meaning behind it. So I went to Purdue because they had a program that was targeted to help figure that out. It's called Law and Society. It lets you take a variety of courses that help you potentially be successful in law school. And I was very interested in everything that I was studying in political science and sociology and criminology. And when it was time to kind of move on from undergrad and take the LSAT, I did not do well. I was not prepared for law school. I didn't have, the mindset yet of critical thinking and really being prepared for what I was going to do in law school. And so, again, I did something different. When I graduated from Purdue, I took some time to be out in the real world and get some actual real life experience. I was interested in public policy, so I went and did an internship at the Indiana Statehouse, which was probably kind of set me off on the best course I could have gone, and seeing how things really happen at the Statehouse, how a legislative body makes law, who's making our laws, how do those get to the point of actually becoming the laws that we have to follow and interpret and understand. And that was really a 2 or 3 month internship, and it turned into 3 years of working in state government, politics and lobbying and government affairs. That's how I first met anyone who ever worked at Barnes Thornburg. And those were the people who then I saw as I wanted to be like. I wanted to find a way to make myself positioned to be an attorney at that kind of firm and stop thinking about how to make law and who is going to lobby for law, but interpret and be practical about what you do with the law once it's written. And at that point, I retook the LSAT and did far better. And I kind of knew, okay, this is the right path for me. And from there, I was able to do successfully at IU McKinney and was so happy that I stayed in Indy and went to law school here and didn't try to change my environment for something that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed being in Indianapolis. And, that kind of enabled me to get back to connected with Barnes and Thornburg and start my legal practice here in Indianapolis at B&T.
Yeah. So that's where you and I kind of met because I remember you being a summer associate at Barnes and Thornburg. That's when we originally met. And so I want to know what inspired you to become an attorney. You said it was kind of always there, but you didn't really convey where that came from or where that desire, even the exposure, because I've said many times I never even knew being a lawyer was a thing or was certainly a thing that I could achieve. So how did that nugget come to you? How did that desire come to you? And again, did you always want to be a lawyer? And if so, why? And if not, what were your childhood aspirations that influenced you to pursue that legal path?
Yeah, it's funny. I try to self-reflect and think was this always the thing that I said when I was a kid I would do when I grew up? And we had a recent training session at my current role where we were, kind of bringing in people from different parts and training them. But there's always icebreakers. And it's, well, what did you want to be when you grew up? And they knew I was from the legal department. And I said, yeah, be a lawyer. That is the honest answer. I did want to be a lawyer. But it was to kind of answer your question, well, why? I think I had to go through a process of figuring out what does that look like for me.
Yeah.
I knew one lawyer. I had an uncle who was a lawyer, but I had no idea what he did or what that meant. I didn't grow up being a kid of a judge or anything like that. I think for me, it was finding out that really kind of matched my skill sets. So when I had mentioned really kind of getting into public policy and understanding more about how law is made, you can take that and turn it into a wonderful career, but at some point, the politics can drag you down. And I wanted to see, but how does this work in the real world?
Right.
Reading the law is so fun and it's so interesting to know how it all comes together, but I want to understand how to interpret it and apply it in a real sense. And that's where I found that that is kind of my skill. I'm pretty good at written word, putting things together in a way that makes a lot of sense to someone reading it, but then also making an argument. I love debating. I've got friends that would probably be you're enough debating, we're just hanging out. I'm but it's so much fun. And so that was, I think, going through that process, I'm so glad that I did not go straight to law school. I wasn't ready, but also I needed to figure out that not only did I want to do it, but I think that my skills were matched for doing that, taking a written form, turning it into an argument, making a position, and then trying to convince someone that's the better position to follow. And that just became really fun for me.
Before we go on, I want to talk about this time you spent in trying to figure out what you really wanted to do. You said you took the LSAT once, didn't do that great, came back around, took some time, went and worked in the judicial system, got a little more sense of what lawmaking looked like, and then got introduced to Barnes and maybe another way to practice law or an additional way and said, okay, maybe this is what I want to do. I want to talk about that because we never talk about that, right? We never talk about the failures or the disappointments or, oh, I thought I wanted to do this and I kind of pivoted to that. And you said the second time around, you were so much better positioned. You did so much better. You were more confident. That's what you wanted to do. So what did you learn in that little period, or what did that period allow you to learn about yourself, learn about your environment, your community, etc.? Because again, when we're talking about aspiring leaders, I think there's a lot of pressure. I've got a junior in college right now who I think is feeling pressure on knowing exactly what he wants to do. And the reality is, I didn't know what I wanted to do at 20 and 21. I've literally spent a whole career figuring that out. So tell us
Mhm.
about that period of your life and how it really helped you determine that law was what you wanted to pursue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel so much for your son. That's I remember it so well. And I actually try to tell, we have, no kids of our own, but nieces and nephews. Some are starting to come to that age of driver's licenses. And
Yeah.
now what are you going to do next? And I'm you don't have to know exactly, right? You can figure it out. And I think for me in that process, it was getting uncomfortable and following your gut. I had a gut that it was 2008. Politics was an interesting time and changing things. And I was ooh, I'm very interested in that. I like debating public policy topics, but I'm no expert and I've never really had any experience. So coming out of an undergrad doing these little small internship programs through a course that sort of showed you a peek, but it was so structured that it wasn't really real life experience. So it was truly getting uncomfortable, kind of being in rooms you've never been in, words you've never heard, people you've never seen, and seeing does that like interest you. I think for a lot of young people, they need to hear just try something. You
Right.
don't have to be like, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer, and I've known since I was 5. Like, that's not realistic. The process for me was getting uncomfortable, and then it's okay if you're like, I don't like this. I think a lot of young people too, and even in the law sense for law students, as I was getting almost done or right after, they'd wanna know exactly, like, where do you go with your law degree? How do I know what's the best area of law to take? And I was like, "Well, what are you kind of interested in? Do you have a hunch? Follow the hunch. And if you're wrong, it's fine, just try something different." But for me, that process of being out in the real world, making connections with people, trying to meet a lot of people because I felt like, when you're young and you're trying to get opportunities, you need to have a network, but you gotta build a network from something. So it was a place for me to see hundreds of faces of people that I would have never come across in one place and start to build connections. And once you can do that and find interest in it and maybe do a little well at something that you're assigned to do, more people are going to notice, you're going to meet more people. And that's exactly what happened for me.
Yeah, I love that, getting uncomfortable, because we are so scared to get uncomfortable, right? We feel like we need to be an expert at everything at all phases of our life. And in reality, that just doesn't happen. You've got to start somewhere. And so you took that time, got more sense of exactly what you wanted to do, got exposed to some people at Barnes and Thornburg and other places, and then became a summer associate at Barnes. Again, I said that's where I got to know you. But I appreciated, similar to what you mentioned previously, being in law school, hearing firm names and saying, how do you all know these firms? Like, they meant nothing to me. And part of that was because I wasn't from Indiana. So I remember being in law school and people saying, oh, I'm going to apply for this job or this firm or this summer associate position. And I thought, why does that even mean something to you? Even more so, as I think you know, I spent 15 years before I became an attorney as a scientist. And I remember specifically having no interest in going to a law firm because I had heard horror stories
Mhm.
about how law firms treat women, how they
Mhm.
treat people of color, particularly big law. And I didn't want anything to do with that. So
Mhm.
I want to know, how did you start your career at Barnes? Like, how did that come about? And what did you learn during that experience when you began growing your career at that law firm? How did you know that was the firm you wanted to be at? How
Mhm.
did you know that that was one over all the other ones that you wanted to work for? And even more so, did you have any sense, because I admittedly did not, what that life looked like? I
Mhm.
can readily admit, part of me becoming a law clerk at the firm was to begin learning, what does being a lawyer even look like, because I truly had no sense at all. So what did that exposure help you really understand about the career of law and what you had gotten yourself into?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I wish I didn't have to say this, but like law school only prepares you to a degree. And
Yeah.
there's a lot that it doesn't prepare you for. And that is a lot of what you're getting at, which is like, what is my life going to be like? What are my options when I come out of law school? Which is, where do I work? How do I use this in a way to get a job? And this is not part of like the Midwestern society, but like be happy in that job, be feeling fulfilled and not just be getting a paycheck and getting the biggest paycheck that you can. And so my way back to Barnes and what's way back, because that was my sort of second time around, was I had had an internship with the team of government affairs attorneys at Barnes and Thornburg in that 3-year period of finding out different, experiences at the Statehouse and around the Statehouse. And that's, one of the groups that I was like, this was the first group of attorneys I'd ever been around. I was working for them. You're an intern, so you're like trying to make their life easier. But in doing that, you sort of see and hear a lot about what their day to day life is like. And the biggest part for me, which I still like, this is about finding jobs, you should follow this tenet no matter what, is the people. Not everyone is perfect, okay? That's just true. You're right. There's just aspects of big law that are challenging. But by and large, those initial group of people that I worked with, I was like, these are the coolest people ever. They're changing laws. They're giving me opportunities. And who am I? I'm just sort of this young pup that's never really done anything. And so for me, it was I'm coming out of law school now. I really think this is the right path for me. And same as you, where do I even start? I was like, well, that law firm's a pretty good law firm. Like, could I qualify to work there? How would I do that? Because I know there's at least some people who are people that I would want to work around. And working with good people is like, if it's not number one, it's got to be on your list
Right.
as high. So I still entertained other firms and tried to find ones where employment law was really for sure on the list for me. That became something that was my top one. I always came back to when I was at the Statehouse. I was assigned to work on, the labor committees and understand what policies were coming through in the employment realm. And it just felt so interesting to me. So I was looking for firms that could give me that opportunity to focus on that area. And then when I was fortunate enough to get an interview, I would be trying to judge the people. And if I was getting bad vibes, I'm probably not going to go want to work there. But I was exposed to more of the attorneys at Barnes and people that were interviewing me. I was like, these are more good people. It sounds simplistic, but there is something to that. That's a big deal. I remember Meredith White, who I'm sure you know, was one of the people that interviewed me. And she asked me a question that I was like, I can't believe at a big conservative buttoned up law firm that someone asked me what TV character would people say remind whatever the question is. You know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
But I was thought, oh my gosh, she's asking me a question about TV and, who's a character that I'm similar to. And that's a small example, but it was about the people. And I was fortunate enough to be able to kind of spend, let's see, almost 7, 8 years practicing law at Barnes Thornburg, which really gave me as your second half of your question is kind of about what was that experience like and how did you become somebody that knew how to go through the day to day. That was a lot of trial by fire, to be honest, Angela. It's a unique place and there's things that you sort of have to rise to the challenge and the occasion on. I kind of learned that quickly, which was a skill set that I'm thankful that I developed of you got to take initiative. And now as someone who manages a lot of people and sees how challenging it is to train initiative, like how do I instill in you
Right.
that you want to go after this and figure it out on your own and then come to me once you've already tried to figure it out is a really hard thing to do as a manager and a leader, but it was trial by fire and that kind of there were a lot of people guiding me along the way. I don't want to say I was just sort of left to figure it all out on my own. That's not the case. But it did sort of say like, hey, you're a lawyer now. No one can give you the play by play for your day to day. And you need to sort of start to try to figure things out on your own and use your brain. That's what you've kind of been paid to do. And that's what you're here to do. So yeah, that was sort of the way that I came back and got into that big law environment and then the initial experience of like kind of being a new attorney in that place.
I fully appreciate that because one of the things that I appreciate about Barnes and Thornburg is exactly what you mentioned. They give you first wonderful people to work with and train you because again, I walked in as a new patent attorney, but having no clue what that actually means, like in practice and in real life. And being blessed to have attorneys around me who literally trained me to be an exceptional patent attorney. Also, being in an environment where you have the autonomy to truly drive your career. And for some people, to your point, that is a challenge. They don't necessarily have the initiative. I appreciate your gusto as a manager to try to instill initiative in people. For me, I feel like that's one of those characteristics. Either you have or you don't.
Yeah.
You've got to have the self-motivation to say, I'm going after this. And quite frankly, law school taught me a lot of that. Like, it's something you've committed yourself to, and you've just got to commit that failure's not an option. I'm going to make it work. And you're literally figuring it out as you go, particularly if you're a person like it sounds like you and I, where you sign up for this without any real exposure or introduction from family members or mentors or whatever as to what that really looks like. So certainly for me, I appreciate that initiative, drive, those type of things are things that really get accentuated in a law firm environment because
Mhm.
everyone's busy. Everyone has 1,000 things going on. And even when you are a brand new attorney, you're not getting babysat. Like
No.
nobody has time to babysit,
There's no time for that.
That's
Yep.
right. I mean, you're exactly right. You have to have your own initiative. So I would ask, given your experience in the legal market and your legal career here in Indiana as a female attorney, what do you think are some things that we here in Indiana can do to keep people who are from Indiana here in Indiana wanting to build a career or establish roots in Indiana?
Yeah. Well, I had mentioned that I was very happy I selected a law school that was in Indianapolis,
Hmm.
which then enabled me to target my job search in Indianapolis. And I think that something that, law firms can do or just, businesses can do if that is they're trying to keep and attract and not necessarily lose to, if it's a very competitive industry and there's attractive companies working on the coasts, how to do that is I really think it needs to be aware that is an option. That is something that, from the outsider's perspective, you don't know, hey, behind those walls, is it really just people from elite schools? Are you just hiring the best of the best from the country? And I think that's a misconception that maybe is an older one that's going away, but that as somebody who, is studying at law school in Indiana right now, might still be wondering, like, can I get my foot in the door in a firm like this in Indianapolis? Um, and who are the people that are working there right now? Are they people who have gone to a school in Indiana and want to stay because their family's in Indiana or not? And it's almost exposure to that, realizing that, yes, it's not just people who've gone to elite universities and have the top scores. You're actually looking to find people that can communicate with your clients. And if your clients are in Indiana, they will not be able to connect. They won't be able to build that trust relationship of the advice and counsel person I'm going to call if you are like, I don't even connect with this person individually because they're so different from me. And so that is a lot of what being BNT in Indianapolis is. It's a lot of people are from here. And that was a nice eye-opening thing for me to learn kind of starting out, which is I did not have to be worried about competing against people from the East and West Coast. I could do that. I could be at one of the best law firms in the state by being just somebody who went to the local IU,
Yeah.
school here in Indianapolis.
Yeah, also having a support system. When you are starting off, I feel like everybody now has heard about billable hours and how challenging they are. But those first few years as an attorney are an absolute grind. Like
Mhm.
they are absolute grind, and you need a support system. And if your support system is here locally,
Mhm.
that helps or certainly heightens or increases the likelihood that you will be able to successfully stay in that career path and actually find happiness in it. Because the happiness is not always during the grind. I enjoyed myself through that crazy part, but that was because it was so new to me and it was different and I was working with new people and new clients and all the exposure. But the work and the grind was real and
Yes.
it is exhausting. But having a real support system allows you to get through that part of it to get to the heightened role, which is really when you begin to feel like you're making impact for your clients and you're changing people's lives and you're really making a difference day to day. That's what energizes you to keep staying on that hustle because
Mhm.
it's exhausting otherwise. And so certainly if your support system is local, that's all the more reason that, you can bring a support system to Indiana or you have one here. I think that also really helps us as Hoosiers retain top talent because I've seen too much talent come and go simply because they don't have a support system here. And while the job may be great or they like it, they can't foresee themselves staying for years and years because ultimately everyone wants to have a family, whatever that looks like, or, close friends or a community, etc., where you live, work, and play, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's hard to find where those two intersect easily, but it's true. I had a great attorney colleague of mine at JD Finish Line who was another lawyer, but her family was from the Texas area, from Oklahoma. And it was hard for her to always feel like she had that sort of outside of work
Yeah.
team that and she was very close with her family. So she wound up leaving, which was a real loss because she was great. But I think it's important, maybe if we're thinking in the legal sense, you don't necessarily have to pick this best school ever. You really kind of want to think about, where do you want to live
Right.
and where are your people, and then try to direct it around that so you're not uprooting your life in a couple of years
Yeah.
to get closer to that.
Absolutely. So, referring back to some of the nuances and particularities of private legal practice, one of the things I didn't appreciate about a law firm before I got into a law firm is that it's really no different than any business. It's about making money, it's about doing good for the local and national community. And particularly as an attorney and a partner, you really are your own enterprise. I jokingly tell friends and neighbors that this as a partner in a big law firm is as close as I ever want to be to being an entrepreneur. You truly are your own business in the context of a partnership. And I appreciate that probably most people who are not in law firms or haven't experienced that really don't appreciate the mechanics of how private practices, law firms in particular, are operated and how they work. So one question I have for you is, can you tell us one or two skills or tasks or expectations that you didn't really appreciate that were critical to your success as a law firm attorney before you became one? And then what do you think most clients or prospective clients of professional legal services like law firm practices don't know and probably should appreciate about the business side of running a law firm? Because in my experience, people pick up the phone and think, Angela, okay, I've got an issue. I need you to help me. And it doesn't work like that. Yeah.
No, it doesn't. Oh my gosh, it is the business mindset. That was like a skill that I think I- I can self-reflect and figure out, how did I get to develop this? But it's something that clients had told me before, is they forgot that I wasn't on their team, and that was like, oh, I've done it. Like, I figured it out because I'm making their day-to-day easier. And for lawyers who, we can debate the settings of law school and is that really the right way to learn? Or shouldn't they be kind of out more, doing more with the skills? Because they needed to be able to understand what is on your client's plate. Like, that's the business mindset of, how do I actually help you solve this problem, where I'm not just kind of telling you the rules. And when you would hear kind of younger attorneys, you give them a space to answer something for the client you're working with, and that's what they would do, and you'd kind of cringe, like, someone needs to help get them to where they have more of a business mindset, which is, you have to have kind of come up with a few of the solutions in your own mind first and assess how those are going to work for your client. And how is that realistically going to be played out, to see, is your suggestion even something that you should be presenting, or is it a waste of their time? And that kind of goes in hand with the other skill set I didn't realize that I would need in being an employment lawyer, which is, we represent all industries. So we don't necessarily just find one industry that we dive in. We understand their lingo and what they have to develop their skills on. We kind of have to know a little bit about everything.
Right.
And that became really challenging too, which was, wow, I don't have any experience in automotive manufacturing or in the science and chemistry work they'd be doing at Eli Lilly, but you are advising them on the employment law requirements that require you to understand that. You need to know, like, what are they facing throughout their day, so you can take those things off their plate in a more realistic way. So that business mindset of, I always kind of go back to, it's like coming up with the 1, 2, 3. What are the 1, 2, 3 scenarios that are going to be the most likely ones that are on the table? And then helping the client understand, if you go this way, okay, this is something you need to be thinking about. This is going to what you want to talk to your leader about. Make sure they're aware of this. If you go this way, there's going to be this pitfall. You need to understand if that's desirable to you, work away around that pitfall. And really kind of thinking a lot more practically. That was something that I understood quickly I needed to develop because the initial training we were talking about earlier of coming in as a new attorney, something I was shown or given was legal memos. And like I almost laugh now just thinking about like if on the other side, being the client, if I was ever handed a legal memo, I'd send it back and be like, what does this mean? And actually answer my question. So you had to really kind of learn a different way of doing things and get a business mindset as quickly as you could. Um, the thing that I think that clients maybe it would be helpful for them to appreciate a bit more about that business side is we often sort of on the client side have looked at why is this person the one answering my question? If I've seen, there's a junior lawyer who is just, it's not, I don't need the person that's done this in the most risky of settings. This is a more straightforward thing. And I kind of want to get a deal out of here in the sense that I am also trying to save money. I can't just endlessly spend money. Where I know if you've got a great junior lawyer that Angela's been training, I would love for clients to understand of just go straight to that person. Talk to Angela about that. Hey, this person you're training them on, can I just go straight to them? And sometimes I would just try to do that and I would see the partner get looped back in at some point like they're not letting that person kind of run with the skills I'm seeing them do, which is we kind of know when we need the expert, and
Right.
that's who you're going to call. But then clients can sort of maybe have that different mentality of, is there somebody who's going to kind of be available for these routine day-to-day questions to where I'm not having to track down the $650 an hour lawyer when that's not really what I need and that's not a good spend of the
Yeah.
business's dollars.
I want to talk about your new role because you've kind of transitioned out of legal. So all that legal training, law school, and that just seems like the natural career progression. I've talked to multiple lawyers who started out in the legal practice and whatever company, and then you get more to the business side of things, right? Not just looking at the legal issues always, although always having kind of that critical mindset and that legal vantage point or that legal lens. But now you've transitioned, at least from what I understand, into more the business side where you're actually directing the business side of things, not just the legal side of things. So I want to know what prompted this pivot or evolution in your legal practice or your legal career trajectory to this new business role. And what are some of the skills you grew as an attorney that you have found particularly to be useful in this new career transition in the business?
So there is no downside to being an attorney. There are so many transferable skills that quickly become something that you're bringing to the table that is different than others, which is always, I think, a welcome thing in a fast moving, forward moving business. The transition, how it came about, I came to JD Finish Line to work for a really great leader, Mark Clark, who actually is just now back at Barnes Thornburg. So you got to swing by his office and say hello because an opportunity came up where his team had an opening and it was not really on my mind. I was kind of doing something different at a small, medium sized firm that's led by some really wonderful attorneys, and some doors were opening for me. But then, you just never know. Like opportunities come at times that you're not expecting. And if you just kind of close them off because you're like, well, I'm not open to anything different, you might miss something. In my case, I would have missed coming to work for a really amazing leader. And the draw was, to me, there was no like, definite successor to him in sort of a GC role. There really wasn't a deputy general counsel. There was an opportunity to come in at a managing level and leading a team, which would get me experience in that regard, and to really kind of do things differently and the same kind of sell for my current role, which is like, hey, come in and give us your honest assessment here, like how we're doing, and then come up with ideas and run with them. And it was like, oh, wow, I never got to really do a lot of that practicing in private practice. The change that I was 2 years kind of working in the legal department, being very close hand in hand with our people team. So, all the different teams that work inside of that human resources function, I was very close with. And I really wanted that to be the way I operated in the legal department, kind of going back to that. We just kind of forgot you weren't on our team. Well, I was now actually on your team and I'm your resource. And I always kind of said to them, like, this is what I'm here for. And that enabled kind of anything that would be not just a legal question, but like a challenging problem they would have or a difficult situation that they were dealing with an employee that, they could solve. They could come up with the ideas. They didn't necessarily always need legal advice, but they were wanting to know what I would think. What would I do here? What are your thoughts? How would you frame this up? What are your talking points if we have this conversation? And that it really kind of became like a pretty smooth transition. Like it felt like we were already kind of going in that direction. And that was because my goal to set out was I want to have this be a very quote unquote customer service driven focus in legal, which is I'm not here to block things. I'm not here to say no. I'm not here to come in and tell you did wrong. That would be the wrong way of operating in an in-house legal seat, just in my opinion. I think that people are going to be better developed, better supported if you're kind of looking at, again, what's on your plate and how do I make it easier? But then to the next level of, let me give you my advice on how I would handle that. Or have you thought of this? And then started kind of mentoring some of those, up and coming leaders that were in that group. And we had an acquisition happen last year that totally changed the nature for a lot of teams and structures. And things were just kind of, at that point, a lot of moving parts. People were stepping into different roles. The role that I took became open because now my boss had assumed an even more senior position within people. And it kind of went back and forth a lot on what I was going to do next in this new realm of our company looks a lot differently than when I came in here. And where do I want to go with this? And this opening, again, kind of right time, right thinking about what do I like doing? What makes me happy? Well, working with this team makes me happy. So I get to still work with that team. Okay. Then I need to really kind of consider that. So that was really how that has come about. And I am so thankful that I have these lawyer skills because when you lead several teams or there's a lot of people reporting up to you, my husband has been a manager for a very long time. He always used to say, like, I'm the question answerer. Like, people just want me to answer their questions and make decisions for them. And now I'm like, oh, you were so right about that. Like, there's a lot of things that need to be decided upon. And when you're an attorney, you have this skill set of taking this information in, absorbing it, asking the questions to fill the gaps, and then making a decision. Because you're like, I've been kind of watching this happen and being a part of it for all the years you've been advising clients on, and knowing that's your role. You need to help make a decision and move things forward and make sure that people have what they need to similarly do that in their own functions. And now opening the doors to and adding a layer of creative strategy, which is where I was going in the legal department, which was kind of starting to be like, oh, maybe even step outside of employment law and learn other areas of law, which I was really excited about. And it was because I really just enjoy stretching my mind. And when you are doing one thing, you can really kind of start to lose all the skills that make you good at whatever you do. Like
Yeah.
just kind of molding your brain and doing things differently. And as much as I truly did enjoy and felt very fortunate to have had that time in private practice and at Barnes Thornburg, I quickly realized how much I wasn't learning. I could have done this all on my own, right? But the clients weren't asking me questions about, this unique regulation in New York City that applies to retail workers, or, how do you understand all the dynamics of operating as an employer in California? And it was like overnight, I was learning so much more than I ever had before. And I was like, oh, I always want to be in that position to kind of keep learning. So moving to the business side has been kind of a continuation of that, just continuing to stretch my brain and take my skills and apply them in different ways.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioned I'm a lawyer. I'm an extension of your team. I'm not here to say no. And I laugh at that because it seems to me that whether you're outside counsel or you're in-house counsel, no matter what, if you're in the legal function, people think your job is to say no, right? And to prevent them from doing what they're trying to do, when in reality, our jobs are as much as possible to enable and empower our teams, our businesses, our clients to do exactly what they want to do, but just in the framework of legality as much as possible,
Right.
or at least to mitigate risk, right?
Yes.
And back to your point of knowing your client, knowing their business, some clients, some businesses are much more acceptable of risk than others. Some people don't want any risk. If there's any opportunity that things can go left or go south, we don't want to do that. Whereas some people are balanced. And so, to your point, as a good attorney, you need to understand that risk profile for your client, for their business, because that really determines what your answer will be if you understand that. And if you don't, you're correct. The answer will likely always be no, because there is a portion of risk in there. So, one thing I want to know as you transition into this new business role, being able to hone your skills, continue to learn and expand and stretch yourself, even within the employment law regime, but just being exposed to so many different areas of that law or those laws. What does your day-to-day job look like? Like, what
Mhm.
does it entail? Obviously, you're managing people, it sounds like, but what does that look like? And how are you able to influence your teams and make positive change for your organizations and possible ways that you weren't able to do when you were in your legal role? And then also appreciating that it's still very new, right? You haven't been in this role too very long, but what successes have you had to date that you're proud of? Or what goals do you have for this role to make real impact in the future?
My day to day is very diverse, which I appreciate. I have always found that no 2 days has literally ever been the same since finishing law school, pretty much, which I'm so thankful for. But right now, it's pretty fast paced, and that's a function of having a number of different, probably let's say 4 core teams that I oversee. And each of them is at a very different place in terms of how are we doing? Do we need to change processes? Having new people on some of the teams. Some of the teams were solid and locked, and some of them we needed to kind of have new faces and getting different people onboarded who were coming in. So it's fast paced in the sense that each team is at a different point, and my job is to kind of help set the strategy, of course, find the ways that, again, I'm coming in with different perspective. I think that was something that my, boss who brought me in now wanted, which was, yes, there is going to be a fresh set of eyes on things who thinks about things differently. And that's what I'm really trying to do with each team that I oversee. And knowing that they are all kind of at different points, it's still doing that in different ways. Like, how do I knowing what the goals of the leave of absence team, which is one that I now manage, should be, how do I get them to that place? And their starting point is going to be a lot different from a different team that I manage. And so my day to day has a lot of time with the leaders on each of those teams, kind of checking in and thinking about how we are moving towards those goals, how we are getting things done that have come up. There's always unexpected things that come up, and we need to make sure we are meeting the demands of the business and making sure leaders have what they need to be successful because we do oversee the talent function. That's the people. And there's an old school way of thinking about HR that I think is you are sort of that gatekeeper, similar to how we were just talking about lawyers, is the no.
Right.
A lot of leaders out there, I think, are afraid of HR. They don't ever want to have to deal with HR. And when I used to be an employment lawyer training them on the things that they should know to be great managers, I always would say, please never say the phrase, that's HR. I don't want to touch that, because that's not what we're trying to do. It's from the beginning to the end. It's not just bringing people in and selecting people and then saying bye, hope you're good in your job, and then firing people who are not doing well, but it's about all of that in between and the things that employees have to necessarily go through that our teams have to be ready to support. Are we doing it in an efficient way that doesn't require the business to lose out on opportunities to do more? And then what are we missing? Like, how are we helping those teams be successful in their own roles, understanding the demands that they have? And then as a human being, the challenges that they're going to face, and how do we help them get through that? So much of that life stuff is really on the employer in our society to deal with health issues, with financial issues, with family issues, childcare issues. The system does as much as it can, but it's really kind of at the feet of the employer to enable individuals to be successful. That's the investment in talent that we are making. And so my day to day is hard to sort of pin down in the sense of no day is the same, but I love that. I'm constantly interacting with people all day, and I'm so thankful for that. I have a colleague who jokes that when he walks by, he just did it to me before I came over here. He jokes that when he walks by, if my door's open, which he says is more rare because there's usually someone in there talking to me, your door's open and you're here and you're available. And I've got to work on that to sort of be able to find more time. But that's kind of the function of having a lot of people that I'm trying to enable to be as successful as they can. And what a fun thing I get to do. So the kind of successes I think we've had, I mentioned, I managed the leaves team and we had to really kind of reset and bring in new team members, get them trained up, feeling like the teams that have to help facilitate when an employee is going through something like a medical issue, leave of absence, or having a child, that experience needs to be a good one for the employee, but also the management team and the HR team that are helping navigate that and still supporting the business are a lot more aware of what's happening and that we're not leaving somebody in the dark, when they're going through a tough time. So I'm really, really happy, and that's a huge success. And I'm very proud of that team for all the work we've done in a pretty short window. And my goals, I think I would kind of go maybe higher level to try to find ways for our team to reaffirm the culture that brought me to JD Finish Line. Not that we are losing it in any sense, but I think it's just something so important to be cherished, to make sure that we are constantly thinking of that culture, that aspect of the most productive our employees will be is, like I said, when they're happy. And culture's so hard to create and define. And I've worked in places that I would say don't really have any culture and some that have tons of culture. And I love the aspects of our culture at JD Finish Line that I want to find more ways to grow and reaffirm and keep that tight, because it's such a quick thing to lose and it's hard to pin down. And there's a lot of ways that our team is helping facilitate that.
Now it's time for a break.
Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with the Inside Indiana Business Radio On Demand podcast. Available now at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back with Jackie Gessner, Vice President of Talent Management and HR Compliance at JD Finish Line, on this 53rd episode of the Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. I can really appreciate how you being in HR absolutely effectuates or impacts the culture, influences the culture. And it's got to be wonderful to have someone like you who has had a good experience at the company in a position to really impact that culture and make sure that your peers and your colleagues also have that same experience. I very much appreciate how you talk about the person who's going through a tough time. They're on FMLA, they're caregiving for a parent or a child or whatever the case may be, because obviously in HR you see the full spectrum of all the things, and just appreciating and making sure, as you said, that they don't get lost or they don't get overlooked or unseen, because for them, that experience is part of their culture, right?
Absolutely.
And how they are treated and how they feel like their company shows up for them or does not, whether, you send flowers at the funeral or you send, all the things, whatever it means and looks like in a real sense to people, to feel like their employer supports them and they see them, particularly when they're not at their top of their game because they've had a family situation come up or whatever the case. That's all what culture feels like when you're in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure that person still is involved and committed to the company when they come back after that experience must be particularly important for someone like you.
Absolutely. And it is, for many of those events, as you described, like that could be one of the most significant events that happens either while that person works for us or just in their life in general.
Right.
And if it doesn't go in a way that we are, again, creating a good employee experience with strong culture, that's going to stick out, and it's probably never going to be lost in their mind. Like, that's the experience I had when I dealt with this horrible family situation. And we really want to have the opposite. They want to be able to say, wow, I was really supported there. I had people helping me. Maybe there's an impact, and oftentimes this is true, on their actual day-to-day job because of those things. And instead of avoiding the opportunity to ask those questions, we need to be the people driving it. Say, well, you mentioned something about they've but really kind of been struggling financially, and that kind of slipped out into conversation in a way. But then now we're here to talk about how they've been underperforming. Are there life stressors going on? Are there other things that we want to be empathetic towards? It doesn't erase that like the job still needs to get done, but are we supporting them in a different way? And that's that culture that I just feel very fortunate to be a part of.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You remind me so much of my friend Kristen Whedon, who is the talent. I don't know what her proper title, but she's been on the show. She's their talent HR person at IMS with Jimmy McMillan, who I
Mhm.
know you know.
Mhm.
And she, like you, is so passionate about making sure that her employees are supported, that they feel like they have the space and the place to be able to convey when things in their lives have gotten difficult. And for years, I mean, my parents grew up in the generation where you didn't tell people that stuff. Like you kept
Honestly, yep.
you kept that close, you struggled through, you pushed
Mhm.
through. And the reality is we understand, particularly today with, the concerns on mental health, like trying to do it all and balance all the things without any real appreciation for what people are going through in a holistic way is really going to effectuate your job. I'm sorry, impact your job performance. That's a real thing.
Totally. And it's you're kind of hitting on it's not just for those suffering from mental health issues, but it's that suffer in silence
Absolutely.
mentality. It's very much a Midwest thing. And you don't want to think about it in a dollars and cents standpoint, but that is part of our job, which is how do we help people be productive? So they do their best job and then they go on and they elevate and they get promoted and then we keep them because they're happy and so on and so forth. But if there's not something helping drive their comfort in coming to that person. The worst thing in our people world is there's been something going on for a very long time and no one knows about it until it's way too deep.
Right.
And that's where you want to kind of reverse to say, you should know who your person is that you can go to, and you should feel comfortable in understanding how they can support you and knowing that there might be something that you never even knew that they can support you with. And that's kind of what you strive for. It's for the person, of course, first and foremost, but it's also for business success. Is
Right.
you don't want to have people every day struggling to just kind of get through the day. They're not going to be giving you their best performance.
So let's shift gears slightly and talk about being a woman, right? Being a woman in the legal field, in private practice, in leadership, in companies, all the things. No question, you've been successful. I've been successful. But there are challenges that we can act like it doesn't exist all day or all night. But there are just some additional challenges that women will face in the workforce. You mentioned some of them. We're typically the primary caregiver. We're clearly, oftentimes, I won't say clearly, oftentimes the primary parent in the household, like all the things. And none of that stops when
Mhm.
you go to work every day or have additional responsibilities, especially when you are at a level where you have extremely sensitive and demanding responsibilities at work. So, what has been your experience in ascending the leadership ladder, not just at your company, but over the course of your career? And have you seen shifts or have you seen changes in how women are more successful or less successful or able to break that glass ceiling in a way that, when we were in law school and hearing the women leaders at that point talk about ascending leadership and what that looks like and how it feels, et cetera. What's been your experience?
My experience has been surprising. I think I first start and remember you're young and you're idealistic and you assume that everything is fair and people mean the best, and then you go into the real world and you're like, oh, okay, I probably need to stop thinking so rosy. And law school was kind of the first foray into that, where I think you would assume that people who've been around a long time of generations above us, that they would have different views than us. But in law school, this was not pervasive, but a few comments would stick out where I was surprised, like, "Oh, wait, what? Isn't that an old school way of thinking of even law school peers?" I remember a law school classmate once mentioning their frustrations with a female professor and not doing as well from this particular professor. And the frustration that they had was couched kind of with the she's just frustrated because she's in a man's profession. And I was like flabbergasted and didn't even know how to respond because I thought that we're all of a different generation here. Half of us, if not slightly more than half, are women. What? Like, is this really how this is going to be? And I figured that would be something you would deal with later on with the legal leaders that you were facing, not from people coming up in my generation. And there was more of that too. I was very involved in the Women's Caucus, which is an organization for female students, not just female students, but for helping them, identify ways that they can be a part of the legal community, connections that they can make, bridging together kind of as a group. And we had some sort of student organization fair, and a male student had come up to our Women's Caucus table with a very questioning mentality of, asking us why we felt the need to have a group that was for women, and didn't we think that that was really not necessary anymore. And I clearly kind of understood this person had not looked into any stats on women in law firms and leadership roles. And again, just kind of someone from a generation that I thought, isn't this are we done with this? Like, really? So those kind of comments initially, you move on, you focus on your own thing, and that person, who knows where they are? Honestly, either of them, I have no idea and didn't bother to keep track. Then I think moving into the law firm world, you're hitting on it, which is, and I had a sensitivity to this because I don't have kids, and I did not want to try to be arguing a position that I didn't experience.
Mhm.
But I also became a lawyer because I love to advocate and debate, and seeing people who I thought were destined to be amazing attorneys having kids and then leaving the firm. And what you're describing were things that I was wanting to just raise as questions, like, shouldn't we be talking about this? I don't need to be the advocate for it, but I'm just worried about it because I think these people are amazing. And they're saying it's really hard to do all these things because of that sort of societal structure that, who knows how long it'll take to break. But I think that I learned in kind of going over the years to pay attention to different voices. So then later, and maybe midway through, people like Judge Kelly Barr, and I think this was around the time of COVID, she and her husband, Matt Barr, who you know, because he's also a partner at Barnes, it was maybe a post or something of their comments kind of about the co-parenting, the shifting of mentality from the women have to go deal with the sick kid or pick up from the school, and that's just automatically assumed that's them. But more so thinking about having two careers at the house and not having someone just be available to your beck and call, and you kind of coming and going at whatever time the demands of your job meant. That is something that for me was just, I think that there are a lot more different experiences and voices now. My challenge in kind of coming through the firm was that I didn't see those and I didn't know how to go find them. And I thought my way to be successful was to focus on who was around me and not step back and go, but what's going to be best for me? And there were people kind of closer towards the end when I was thinking that it's now time for me to look elsewhere, who all of a sudden I realized got that and sort of wanted to help figure out a different way of doing things that didn't fit that same mold of sole breadwinner, someone who is a successful, smart adult is taking care of everything for you at home. And that means that you can be here as early as possible, lights on, butts in seats. And again, I'm sensitive to this because I'm not a parent, but I wanted those people to be around me in 10, 15, 20 years. And so that was my fear of again, going back to happy, successful, good work is having great people around you. If I'm seeing the great people saying this isn't going to work, well, then I'd like us to try to figure out how do we change that. And that is the thing about kind of the law firm experience and the male-dominated aspect, if you want to call it that I wish I had earlier on been exposed to those female leaders, male leaders who are extremely wonderful advocates that are not necessarily all just, within an arm's reach, that you have to start to find them. But that's a hard thing to do, is how do you know who those people are and who's going to be able to help you navigate your own path and being successful that doesn't just match everyone who is in all of the doors around you. So for me, that was the challenge of kind of realizing, ugh, man, there's just still people thinking like that. But that was needing to kind of shake that naive, young, idealistic view of the world to a more realistic one. And then knowing how do you navigate around that and focus on the people that are going to help you be successful. And the thing that I wish I would have figured out sooner is how do you find those people?
Yeah, absolutely. I fully appreciate what you've conveyed. And I also appreciate that certainly there are challenges in all respects. But I do now, having been a person who was blessed enough to have a young child when I came to the law firm. So I didn't experience actually having kids and initially raising children. I came, but also appreciating how the dynamics have shifted as I watch my younger male colleagues now becoming fathers. And it is no longer necessarily the generation of the man goes out and works all day, the woman stays home. Many of my colleagues and most colleagues, I suspect, are dual income people,
Mhm.
both highly professional, trying to figure out how to balance these two challenging and demanding careers and raise the kids and keep the grass cut and
Mhm.
keep the lights on and the mortgage paid and all the things. And at least I love seeing my colleagues, my male colleagues in particular. It's funny to me because I remember doing all that. Remember,
Yeah.
now have a 21-year-old, but me, I did that. And so
Mhm.
watching them and hearing how they're spending every weekend on the baseball field because that's what you do when you're at that point with kids and they're playing sports. Like it's
Mhm.
never ending. And then figuring out being up all day and night, doing work and managing around all that. It is changing. But sadly, to your point, a lot of that change is because men are now experiencing the real pressures and
Mm.
challenges
Mhm.
of having to navigate it all and realizing, yeah, paternity leave's probably not a bad thing. Like having some time off for sick kids probably isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so I would hope that things are changing, but as optimistic as I am, I still hear from my female colleagues how challenging it is, particularly in the legal field to have children, raise kids, caregive. We're
Yeah.
focused on kids, but just be a way to deal with sick elderly parents,
Totally.
right? And still maintain your practice, keep your clients happy because the reality is, particularly in private practice, or at least I feel like this, and maybe you feel differently now that you're inside, is the demands never stop. It never
Mm-mm.
slows down. And even when people are aware of what you're going through, at the end of the day, business still has to keep going, right?
Yes,
It can only
exactly.
slow down so long.
Yeah, and I think, I sort of maybe coming out of the law firm setting, something I started doing was like trying to think about things in the sense of it's because I'm a woman or I'm not a man. And I wanted to sort of stop. Let me just try and not think about that for a while. And I think that maybe there's good to that and bad to that. But I've kind of found, those initial examples I gave of like, oh gosh, is that really how you think? In doing that, now it's swung back the other way of male colleagues or just people who I look up to mentioning it to me of like, have you thought about this? And I'm sensitive to this. And it's bringing me back to, oh, you know what? It's okay to kind of bring that back into the conversation. I was so fearful of ever raising that because I had, and I think it was not well received. And then I was like, let me just not do that anymore. And I'm just not going to raise those questions. And now, sort of the other view of working in those environments, coming into a corporate environment that is very diverse. It was so refreshing to kind of come into a place where when you looked around, you did not see a fill in the blank. It was just, well, there isn't one gender, one race, one age, anything. It was, we serve young people, we employ diverse people. And so we have found a great way of determining how do we reflect that. We can't just become the corporate headquarters in Indiana that doesn't look like our customers and our employees across the country. And that's a wonderful thing. And when you have worked in Indiana, exclusively, and it's a predominantly white state, your environments reflect that. So all of a sudden to come in to see that difference, it is a great sort of just personal example to me of that really does help drive what we need, which is different ideas, not keep doing the same thing, have the way to adjust to young people who are going to want to do things differently and work differently and shop differently. And so if we just have sort of the same subset of people that all look like each other answering all those questions, we will be behind and we won't be successful as a business. So I'm just thankful of kind of seeing the spectrum and seeing it differently. And it's, again, not to say that there are not people who fit that mold but are aware and are thinking differently and are asking the right questions. It's just kind of really nice in my experience to all of a sudden have a lot of people that I never got the chance to work with be all around me all the time.
Yeah, that is absolutely the beauty of being in a national, international, global company. Even if it's based in Indiana, it still reflects that national, global customer base or employee base. And so you get that exposure. I remember Kay Vitung at Roche telling me the same, that how she just enjoyed her employment environment because it was so diverse, because they're a global company and they have people from every walk of life, every nationality, every ethnicity. And it was so nice because that didn't really reflect her day-to-day life in Indiana, right?
Mhm.
And so I really appreciate that perspective. One of the things I want to ask you about, you mentioned being a part of the Women's Caucus, and I know we were part of BT Women back in the day. Like, I think I've also been involved with all kind of women's organizations, and that's always been important to me. So speaking to that peers comment of, do you really think that's still important? It very much is still important, particularly in the fields that we work in. But I want to know, in all of the women's organizations I've ever been a part of, they always talk about promoting each other, advocating for one another, supporting one another, etc., particularly to advance business, whether you're an entrepreneur in private practice or whatever the case, corporate America, etc. However, in real life, I find way too many situations where women are still some of the worst enemies of women. Like, that, sadly, is still really pervasive from a competition perspective or just a straight hateration perspective or whatever the case may be. I
Mhm.
still see too many examples of that being the case. And so what I want to ask you about is, what has been some of your experiences with women truly supporting women in business and law? Are there experiences that you're willing to share that exemplify some of the unique challenges or biases or barriers that women often experience when dealing with other women in leadership? And I hate to talk about this because I know often it just perpetuates that kind of chauvinistic mentality anyway, but the reality is it's true and it's real. And if you are a female leader who has gotten to any level of real influence, you're likely going to experience that. And for me, it's been heartbreaking. Like, it really
Mhm.
breaks your spirit at times.
Mhm.
So what's been your experience in that regard? And how did you overcome it or, move past that to continue your advancement?
Absolutely. A lot of the experiences I've had, right, are with a lot of other lawyers. And so when you think about kind of the women supporting women, it's in those years of, my coming up in private practice, it was women lawyers. And lawyers are very competitive people. And I think I don't know if it was just maybe something we all just assumed on ourselves, but also the data just showed it. It was like, well, there's only going to be X percent of women. And that needed to change. But if our competitive nature was driving us to want to win that award or get that recognition or get that seat, that, elevated leadership role or that seat at the table, then if another woman got it, that's going to be the smaller and smaller percentages that it was you getting it. And I know there's people like rolling their eyes at this, but like that's the assumption when you look at how many women are there in leadership roles that you start to give yourself, which is I'm competing with that other woman who is, in many sense, people that we care about. I'm thinking of people who've been so successful, my peers who you're like, I want them to succeed. So again, I think about my kind of deciding to go out into the world, get a little bit of experience before going to law school, allowed me to be just a teeny bit older. Again, I was still young at the time, but just a teeny bit older than everyone else to try to be more secure in your own success and stop comparing yourself to others. And that was the way I could kind of help to take what was, an award of a peer that I cared deeply about to say, yes, that's excellent. Great. I'm so happy for you. And it's not about me. It's not about, I didn't get that then. That's another, year I'm going to be behind or another tick in the box that I'm not going to get. And it sort of became like people were looking at you, well, like, how come you're not the person that would have been that recipient of that thing? Because so few and far between would be, I don't know, the percentage of women incorrectly or correctly. So my experience has been trying to go back to, I'm sure you've got many different core female friend groups, but there's probably one that's like your solid one in the middle that you go to with these challenges, which is if, you've got a sort of career issue, insecurity about something, that you take it there and then they're going to not just say, oh, it's okay, like, don't worry, but more like, let's problem solve this. How do we get through this? And using those, again, peer women, all of whom in this group I'm thinking about are also attorneys, to lift each other up, to use that as the way that you remind yourself to stop doing that. I compete against that person. They're successful, therefore I'm not, is such a negative mentality that isn't going to allow for you to, again, just be successful and happy in your own regard.
Yeah.
And get to the career that you wanted for yourself, not because you thought, well, that's the way I need to go about it because that's what other people are doing. So I think that in my experience, that has been part of that comparison has been you're going to look at people who look like you and you're looking at the other women who are succeeding. And when they're doing well, you must think, well, that means that maybe I'm not doing as well. And that's just such a reverse mentality from what you should have, which is I'm so happy that that person's in that position because then as I've kind of gotten more recent in my career and I see it's very funny because I know that I'm sort relatively still young, but I do feel old just in the environment that I'm in now because I am the older person, which is weird. But there are some bright and wonderful young people that I've worked with and seeing kind of the young women of like their eyes go wide when they get to interact and see someone trying to develop them and trying to get them to succeed. And they're just like, oh, this is so wonderful. I'm like, exactly. You wanted to be young and in a position of having somebody see something in you, encourage it, help you flourish. And if you're both women, then that's all the better. So maybe that's an overly, again, rosy view of it, but just kind of trying to focus on the positive and not have everything be a competition and a you won, therefore I lost sense of mind.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. When I think about these scenarios, I think about what my mother always tells me, which is what God has for you is for you. No one can take that away. And also doing what I really try to do, which is if you get an opportunity and it elevates you in some way, then use that to elevate someone else. If you win an award, there has not been one award that I've ever won or received that I have not then nominated someone else for that next award. Because if I've won it, then I know at least a half dozen other women that deserve it, right? And using that influence, because then you do have influence. If you're an award recipient, you met the mark. So when you nominate someone else, it does get elevated attention. It does get a little more commitment and visibility because you've already met that. And so that is a way to use those things that is not competitive, right?
Yes.
My foot in the door just allowed everybody to get their foot in the door, right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And then in business, that absolutely transfers because it does mean no good. And I will fail if the teams that I'm supporting, women or men or whomever, are not set up for success and they're not feeling like they similarly have that support, that feedback, that when you've done well, I'm going to reward that. And then if I've gotten into an opportunity where I can be around the higher level leaders and that something I've done has been right along the way, now all of a sudden I've got those names in my mind and you're bringing them up in conversation. And that is going to be more success. Again, if you think of it in a selfish mentality, it's if those are people who I've tried to bring up or who are on my teams and they're elevating and going on to be successful, you're an excellent leader.
Right.
So you need to have more leadership roles. And so it's all about if that's, what motivates you is how's it going to help you out? Well, it's going to always help you to have people around you who they are excelling because of something that you've done to enable that.
Absolutely. I think of two LinkedIn posts I think I see all the time, which is until it's my time, I'll clap for others. And you're not a true leader until you've groomed or made other leaders, right?
Totally.
And all of that is absolutely relevant to this conversation. So as we begin to wind down, I have a couple more questions for you. And I want to ask you about transparency and authenticity, right? Okay, you now got this big time job with this beautiful title and you're leading teams, not just individuals, but whole teams of people. So how necessary is it for you to be transparent and authentic in order to truly effectuate inclusion? You talked about having diversity, a significant amount of diversity at your company, but how do all those diverse people continue to feel included? And you've talked about this a bit, but I just want to ask you about how you in particular personify that authenticity and transparency so that the other people on your teams feel like they too have the opportunity to have equity and belonging and advancement and also feel included and part of the culture that we've talked so much about.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier for someone who has found their place in kind of leadership to feel the right to be a bit more authentically themselves. And someone who's just coming up and is trying to figure out and navigate are wondering whether they should mimic or reflect the people that are in those leadership roles. I'm thinking back to like earlier days, kind of starting out at a firm and seeing the ways that people did things, the ways that they got involved in the community, how they got clients. You just thought, I guess I need to be into all that stuff. Take up golf and go to a country club and just try to mimic what was around you. And that is not necessarily being authentic. And people know a fake. They'll spot you really quickly. And so what I had to remind myself during those earlier years was to be yourself, which is sad that you'd have to remind yourself because you didn't want to get to the end and be successful and then have to go, I've been faking it the whole time. This is not me. This is not what I want to do. And of course, in the corporate world, that's a very different environment from kind of coming up through a law firm. But the same rules apply. People are going to sniff out a fake pretty quickly. And what I've learned about myself in kind of doing a, personality assessment and just getting feedback from people that have been people I've supported or worked with, it is that people I don't, it always feels weird as an Indiana person to sort of toot your own horn, but people generally like being around me. That's a weird thing to say, but that's the feedback is like, I like being around people and I want them to have a good experience being around me. And if I am not being my authentic self, that will not be the feedback that I'm getting. Who wants to be around someone who's just kind of, a bit salesy, is just kind of putting on a show all the time? And in doing that now as a leader, that I think allows for your team and the people who are viewing you as a leader to similarly do that. Oh, if that person in that position gets to be honest about the struggles they're having or the mistakes that they've made, and that's so authentic. Like, who's going to admit you made a mistake if you're trying to put on a persona that you're not? That tells them that now they can maybe start to be a bit more their authentically genuine selves. A great leader at Barnes Thornburg who I love dearly. I remember once when he kind of admitted that he had a busy week. There was some kind of client issue that came up and he didn't slow down and think through it and he just messed it up, didn't do well. And this person at that level, I was like, wow, you're admitting a mistake? Like, I didn't think that anybody did that. I don't think partners would ever admit they were anything but perfection. And that kind of enlightened my eyes to what helps people who need good leaders to see that just be genuine, be honest. Transparency in business is you have to have some level of knowing what needs to be for leadership only, but you need to guide people in the right way by not giving them a bunch of smoke and screen and mirrors. And then, when you're asking kind of about, well, how do you then enable that in a more of a real way? You see it, but then how do you facilitate it? It's sitting in that seat. And so in all those meetings that you're in, you kind of can spot it a little bit differently too. And I want people that are on my teams to the ideal, which is to love your job, to love coming to work every day. And to get to that, you have to do some work, of course, but to see the ways in which if you get a feeling that they're holding back, that they're not engaged, that there isn't sort of some level of common trust. You do not have to be best friends with everyone that you work with, but at least some level of trust and comfort to be yourself, to talk about your interests if they're unique and they're not the same as everyone around, to be genuinely interested in other people's interests and where they come from and what things they like to do in their own time and who their family or chosen family, what that looks like. That curiosity and kind of wanting to really know people allows, I feel, that window to open of, well, I actually want to know who you authentically are. And then when we're going to shift to the agenda that we have for this meeting, there's a comfort. And it's a more like, open up and tell me what your genuine ideas are about this. And you don't have to feel like you have to follow a script and reserve yourself to fit a mold because I've just shown you my authentic self. And I've spotted maybe when you're a little bit hesitant and I might start trying to pull at that a little bit so that you see that's what I want because I know that that's how you're going to be your best self at work.
Yeah. I, I I want to ask you, going back kind of a bit, going back to the question of being a female leader from the vantage point of having grown up in Fort Wayne to now being in Indianapolis for a number of years, having built a career and family here. What do you believe to be one of the greatest advances you've seen in your career? You keep saying how, I'm still relatively young, but I'm getting more senior in my career, and I feel that too. And I can't even claim the young part, but I'm definitely getting more senior in my career. So, what do you believe to be some of the greatest advances you've seen Indiana companies make with regard to catalyzing and making sure that they do a better job in recruiting and retaining and advancing and inclusive talent to diverse talent to their workforces, but then also advancing that talent and including them. So many times we hear that people can get the job, but then they're in the job and they just don't feel included. They don't feel the belonging. They
Mhm.
don't feel like they're truly part of the team. What can we as Indiana corporations, nonprofits, et cetera, do to continue to make sure, again, similar to what I asked earlier, that homegrown people want to stay in Indiana and that people looking for opportunities to settle down and establish roots want to come to Indiana?
Yeah. My best way to answer that is from my experience, right? And kind of seeing how a major company that has this huge base in Indiana has done it. And then, we have our affiliate companies that we work really closely with and kind of seeing how they do things as well. One of the things that I love about our culture at JD Finish Line, and again, we do have more of a diverse workforce than I think a typical Indiana company would, but we really stress for our place of work to be a choice that people want to work here. We call it employer of choice. And the way that we do that is we promote from within. And I think that for some Indiana companies, that might be a bit isolating to then not get more diverse if you're just kind of channeling things through and not bringing in outside voices. But because we already have means of bringing in people from our retail side and giving them corporate opportunities through internship programs, funneling different people in, and then saying, instead of always defaulting to let's grab the fanciest resumes that we can, is there anyone here who maybe doesn't have all the perfect credentials, but who's kind of been waiting around for their shot? And we know that they are going to outgrow their role. They've got potential out the, wazoo, and it's time to capitalize on that. and marrying those opportunities with those people who are already there waiting and who've worked hard and whose leaders have been trying to position them to do more and grow more, but they're just sort of there's not necessarily going to be a brand new director role for you here, but we don't want to lose you. And so, how do we help you harness the skills that you have and the potential that you have with what other opportunities are here in our company? And that would then enable us to keep you, to continue to grow you. And you never know where that's going to go because if you've seen, well, I'm an example of it because I was a lateral move from a different department that did not traditionally move out of, legal into something different. But that was a great way for me to see how we should continue to do this is to see how it was for me because I was wondering, is this going to be a place that I can continue to grow here and choose to be here? And that philosophy and that practice of finding those people and finding the roles for them and then kind of bridging that gap, that helps prevent that person from going to the job boards and seeing anywhere, fill in the blank of the location that they might be, again, young, wanting to get experience, maybe not thinking about being close to their family or they haven't been close to their family here anyway. So they're like, I'm happy to go somewhere else if that means more opportunity. But the employer can stop that from happening when you are essentially harnessing your own talent and not letting it bleed out because you missed a chance to take a really talented person who's just maybe capped out in the spot that they're in. And that's what I love about some of the things that we've done, which is building that pipeline of talent from anywhere in the country where we have people. And if they've done really well in anything that they've been tasked with, any position they've taken on, but they're just kind of like, I've done it. I've been doing this for 10 years. I want something new. I get that. Like we talked about that earlier, which is just using your creative mind and learning new things. So I think that's where, having that combination of an influx from different locations to bring that diversity, but then keeping that and building that and not losing the talent and potential that you've invested in, those are your company dollars. That was probably a missed opportunity if that person leaves to prevent that and to show them what's going on. What are my opportunities here? Where are some jobs that I might be able to slate myself into for the next best thing?
Yeah, I absolutely love that answer. Of all the podcasts I've done, I don't think anyone's ever said that. And it's so, so true. Like, particularly if you've already conquered the diverse piece, right? Which many Indiana companies have
Yeah,
not.
we're a little bit ahead of the game there. I will say that.
Yeah. And if you've done that, because I know, and I've been in multiple companies in Indiana, I've seen too many times they let amazing talent go because they're here and they're homegrown and oh well, not that big a deal to go out and chase people from New York and people from Ivy League schools and people who have all the glamour and glitz. And then that person comes in for 2 years and they're gone, right? And you've lost the person who was committed to the company, committed to the community, committed to the, building their career there because you as the employer are chasing all the flashy things and not really harnessing, leveraging, and appreciating the talent you have in-house. I love that answer because it's the truth. And if we did better at that in Indiana, we'd have a lot more talent, not just stay here, but they would self-recruit other talent to Indiana just by word of mouth. Like everything happens, or so many things happen by just people talking about, oh my goodness, I've had such a great career experience. The culture here is so wonderful. My leadership is amazing and supportive. You should come here.
Yes.
That I appreciate that so much. I think it's so, so true and something that I don't see Indiana companies doing as much as we absolutely should be.
And there is this other element to it that is, we talked maybe about this a little bit too earlier, of different ideas. And businesses are going to be better positioned when you just mix things up sometimes. And that doesn't always mean coming in and bringing in someone who's never worked here before, but rather someone who's never worked in that capacity or in that location or in that function. But something of what they are doing is saying they actually could excel here. And could we enable them with some more training to probably get to good as fast as somebody coming in from the outside having to learn from square one who has credentials of that person doesn't quite have that yet. And so that's the other thing, that it's not just, well, we missed the opportunity to keep the invested talent that we had, but we also maybe missed an opportunity to, for that team, shake up some things, come with new ideas, bring in somebody who hasn't done this before. That's me. I'm an example of that, but I see the value in that, and I see our leaders investing in that mindset as well of, if we have had the same people in the same positions for X number of years, we probably are not doing something right.
I have so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend some time speaking with us on the Freedom Forum. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Thank you so much, Angela.
Yeah. Thank you again to Jackie Gessner, and thanks to you for joining us on this 53rd episode of IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Please come back next month for another conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Central Indiana business community.
You know, the economy and the market are in a hairy place these days. It's up a lot, it's down a lot, it's sideways, and it seems on the hour there's breaking news coming out of all areas of the country. How do you get your head around that? How do you not go crazy in the process? I'm Peter Dunn. You may know me as Pete the Planner, IBJ columnist, and my job for years has been to help you understand your financial life better in context with everything else going on. So what am I encouraging you to do? Well, listen to the Pete the Planner Show. Yeah, it's a podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts, or simply listen at ibjpodcasts.com.
Want to give your team a real edge? The IBJ Group Plan delivers unlimited access to every story, every report, every video from IBJ and Inside Indiana Business for your whole team. Cover some or all of your employees with one simple payment. The more you add, the more you save. It's smart, it's flexible, and it saves you up to 30% off the standard rate. Already have IBJ subscribers in your office? Group up and save big. Learn more and get started now at ibj.com/group-plan.